Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, my room was originally quiet at night. I lived alone in a small apartment on the 10th floor of an old apartment building. Everything belonged to me, thinking that I had complete control over this space. But then, everything changed since I decided to install a live broadcast surveillance camera in my bedroom, just to try to feel safer when sleeping alone. I never thought that this decision would open a door to a scary world that I did not want. The camera works by connecting to the phone, allowing me to record images of the apartment at night. At first, I just considered it a small hobby, a way to prove that there is something surprising in the stories people often make up about ghosts or darkness. But when the first frames appeared on the screen, I realized that there are things that cannot be solved by reason. The first night, I put the phone on the desk. The screen was still dimly lit. Everything was normal. From the wardrobe placed close to the old wooden chair in the corner of the room, I slept soundly and nothing strange happened. But the next morning, when I reviewed the discovery, I found that my condition was chilling. At the time of settlement, which was nearly 3 a.m., for a few short seconds, a shadow appeared on the wooden chair in the corner of the room. It was not like a light or a camera effect, but clearly in the shape of a person sitting motionless. I used my eyes to rewind and rewind, but the image was still there. A slender person, sitting straight. His face was unclear, but his eyes seemed to be looking straight at me. I tried to convince myself that it was just a camera error, some kind of academic trick. But when the memory of the chilling feeling came back, I knew in my heart that I could not easily ignore it. That night, I let it go again, both curious and uneasy. I lay down, pulled the blanket over my body, but my heartbeat was pounding like a drum. On the small screen of the phone, the image of the wooden chair appeared, empty, silent. I closed my eyes, trying to sleep until morning. But this time, I couldn't pretend that I didn't see anything. At 2:47, a strange sound rang out from the speaker, waking me up. It wasn't like the sound of wind, nor like the sound of animals, but like a soft, whispering noise in the room. I looked at the camera screen. The chair that was empty a few seconds ago now had a person sitting there, not moving, not saying anything, just looking. I ran and held the phone, my heart pounding with nightmares, sweat dripping from my eyebrows. But when I turned on the room light, all the variations were gone. The wooden chair was still there, empty as if nothing had ever happened. The incident repeated itself many nights later. Each time the image appeared, I convinced myself that it was just my imagination, a vague dream. But when I decided to live stream for my friends to see, they saw the same thing. During the live stream, a friend immediately commented, "Someone is sitting and watching you." I was relieved, my hand shaking as I put down the phone. I did not turn round to the wood. The whole room was filled with heavy silence. Only the sound of my attack in the attack. I began to doubt the house I was living in. Had someone died in this residence? Did that chair carry some words that I did not know? I sought information from the neighbors, but all were silent or evasive. An old lady who lived downstairs only said, "There are things that should not be looked at too closely at night." I could not leave this apartment immediately, because it was the only place I could stay. But I also could not bear to face that shadow every night. I thought about abandoning the saddle, but a voice in my head whispered that it would only make things worse. I shuddered, trying to push the emotional thoughts away. But the truth remained. Someone or something was watching me from that familiar corner of the main room. And then, on a drizzly night, I turned on the camera again, like a familiar rhythm. As the clock hand touched nearly 3 a.m., the screen scrolled gently. The image returned, so the feeling went, and that shadow appeared again. But this time, it didn't just look. I saw it stand up, each movement slow but clear, its eyes looking straight down at me. I held my breath, my whole body stiffened. And then, I can't forget the moment the shadow stood up from the wooden chair. I lay motionless on the bed. My heart felt like it was about to explode. The image on the phone screen moved for a few seconds and then returned to normal, but the shadow had disappeared. I turned around very slowly, looking towards the corner of the room. The chair was empty, silent in the darkness, as if nothing had happened. But I knew, with all my senses, that the presence was still around. The next day, I went to work with the scary images repeating in my head. I told my colleagues, hoping to get a reasonable explanation. But they just laughed, saying I had read too many horror stories online and had automatically created the images. I was no champion, because I also wanted to believe that I was just listening to the sound of my imagination. But the fear of time refused to let go. On the third night, I tried moving the camera to a different position, placing it on the wardrobe to get a wider angle. I still prepared a small nightlight to ease the darkness. I thought the light would dispel the illusion, but in fact, it only made things more complicated. When the clock ticked to nearly 3 a.m., I was half awake and half asleep, hearing the creaking sound of wood. The sound was long, like someone had just gotten up or sat down. I jumped up, my heart pounding, my eyes glued to the phone screen. This time, the shadow did not sit still. It stood at the edge, much clearer than the previous times. A thin base, taller than I imagined, and especially the eyes that were shining in the darkness. It stood still, but I felt like it was looking straight into the camera, through which it looked straight at me. I woke up, intending to turn on the light, but made a backup. During the time to deal with it, I felt that if I turned on the light, I would really see it right in front of me. I gathered all my courage, got out of bed, and approached the corner of the room. From the heavy steps, as if dragged. When I got near the chair, I ran and reached out. Nothing. The chair was cold, old, and silent. But when I turned back to look at my phone, the screen still showed that shadow, right next to me. I fired and moved down to the bed, my heart pounding wildly, then turned on all the lights in the room. When the light flooded in, all the variables disappeared. I sat down, gasping for breath, not relaxing into what I had just witnessed. Obviously, that shadow was not a hallucination. It existed, and it wanted me to know that it was here. From today on, I no longer had a deep sleep room. Every night I only dozed off for a few minutes and then woke up from my sleep. I began to fear my own room, the darkness, even the smallest sound. One evening, I decided to live stream publicly on a social network group that shared horror stories. I wanted proof, wanted many people to witness it, to confirm that I was not crazy. Hundreds of people joined in, leaving comments continuously. At first it was just jokes, provocations. But when the clock showed 2:58, everything became strangely quiet. Then a series of comments began to appear. "There is someone standing behind you." "Look at the chair." I froze, turning from the phone screen. The familiar shadow was there, sitting right on the wooden chair, bent straight, bent down at an angle that was hard to see. I ran for cover, reading the comments, shouting for me to run. Some other spam messages kept saying that the shadow was opening. I couldn't see clearly. I blinked, praying that when I opened it, everything would disappear. But then, the live sound echoed in the room, ambient noise, a very gentle sigh, as if someone was right next to my ear. The entire vanguard, many people went live immediately, but there were still dangerous people, leaving comments encouraging me to continue recording. I felt like I was stuck between two worlds. One side was the extreme fear. The other side was the pressure to prove the real truth. I picked up the phone, moved the camera closer to the chair. On the screen, the shadow raised its head, revealing a pale face, deep eyes, a faint smile like deep mode. I answered loudly, put the phone on the floor. The sound of it crashing echoed in the room. The live stream ended immediately. After that night, I received a series of messages from people who had watched. Some told me to leave the apartment immediately. Some sent me similar stories, horror stories about souls trapped in old houses. But there were also people who sent strange messages, including only one sentence: "It saw you." The nightmare did not stop, because the next night, when I went to sleep, I heard very clear footsteps coming from inside the room. Heavy, slow footsteps approaching my bed. And when I opened my eyes, that night, when I opened my eyes after stepping, the space in the room seemed to freeze. I could hear my heartbeat clearly. Each rapid breath echoed in the silence. On the wooden floor, the sound of footsteps continued, each heavy step approaching my bed. I strained my eyes to see, but in the dim light from the nightlight, I saw no one, only the special darkness that was covering the apartment. My phone fell to the floor after the last live broadcast. The screen cracked, but the camera was still working. When I leaned over, grabbed it, and turned on the app again, I would not stop. On the screen, a figure appeared right next to the bed, leaning against my mattress. But in reality, the spaces beside me were completely empty. I survived the cold. It was no longer a fantasy, but the truth displayed through the camera lens. I turned to punish the space beside me. There was nothing. But when my eyes left, in the phone screen, that shadow leaned closer, as if wanting to whisper something in my ear. I pulled the blanket tightly over my head, running and shivering, praying for time to pass quickly until morning. However, the darkness pitied no one. All night I was immersed in extreme fear, half awake and half asleep, my ears still ringing with the creaking sound of wood and noises that did not belong to me. When dawn came, I felt like a century had passed. The fragile sun cast a pale light through the window, but could not dispel the fame of time. I decided to go to specialized ghost story forums to request research. There, I read countless stories like mine, shadows appearing on camera, footsteps that no one caused, souls trapped in the space between two worlds. I felt like I was part of a big picture, where thousands of other people were also suffering from inexplicable things. An anonymous user sent me a private message. If you see it on camera, it means it has chosen you. Don't try to avoid it. It will follow. I read it, and please stop, as if a stone had just been thrown into my mind. I want to believe it is just a malicious joke, but everything I have experienced makes me unable to deny it. Tonight, I decided to try a different way. I left the camera on, but turned off all the lights and tried to pretend to be asleep. Please, I hope to record it with clearer evidence. The clock ticked to 2:59. The sound of rain falling outside was bright like slow drum beats. I quietly opened my eyes, saw the phone screen reflecting a pale blue light. And then the familiar shadow appeared on the wooden chair again. But this time, it was not just sitting. It was raised from the hand, pointing straight at me. I stopped breathing. My whole body was paralyzed. Then, in a short second, the camera recorded the shadow on the left, walking step by step towards the bed. His face gradually became clearer, his face pale, his eyes sunken. His mouth tightly closed but still making a hissing sound through the gap. I wanted to scream, but my neck was constricted, only making a weak grunt. When he reached the bed, the camera turned on, then suddenly lost the signal. The screen was dark. I jumped up, turned on the light switch, but the apartment was completely empty. I rushed to the wooden chairs, checked every corner, but there was nothing. However, the cold still enveloped the room, as if an invisible hand was touching the back of my neck. The next morning, I played the recording again. The video was interrupted just as the shadow approached the bed, but in the last few frames, there was a detail that made me numb. A faint trace of a hand appeared on the small table below me. It did not belong to me. I began to fall into a state of confusion. During the day, I looked around like a madman. At night, I don't respond to electric lights, but bright light doesn't help. Fear is like a parasite, clinging to my every breath. I went to an acquaintance, a person who used to study supernatural phenomena. After listening to the story, he just looked at me lovingly and said, "If what you said is true, then you have been chosen. The camera is just an open door, and now it's hard to close it." I left the conversation in a confused state. Can I leave this apartment, or will that shadow follow me forever? The questions swirled in my mind, making each passing night seem endless. And then, another night came. I sat in the room, the camera still running, a dim blue light shining on all four walls. When the clock struck 3 o'clock, the phone vibrated slightly, the screen flashed. The current image did not have a single shadow, but more. Each shadow, each pale face, filled the wooden chairs, filled the empty space around me. Everyone turned their heads and looked quickly below me. I just sat there motionless, not moving a muscle, because I understood. I sat motionless on the bed, basically frozen as a series of shadowy structures appeared on the camera. We were sitting crowded on the wooden ring, standing along the wall and even on the edge of the wardrobe. The vertical, lifeless facades, all facing me. I couldn't hear any voices, but it felt like the whole room was filled with whispers. A sound echoed in my mind, making me feel like I was about to explode. I held my head, screaming in despair, but no one answered. When I activated all the lights in the room, all the variations were gone. But I knew clearly that it wasn't an illusion, because on the camera screen, they were still displayed, each shadow still standing still watching me, as if the light couldn't hide the truth. I began to fear this house itself. Every corner, every object could hide what didn't belong to the human world. I decided to leave the apartment for a few days, hoping to escape the dream. I went to a man named David. When I told him everything, David looked at me intently and said in a low voice, "I've heard many haunted stories, but I've never seen anyone being followed in their bedroom like you." David advised me to get rid of the camera, but I knew that the problem was no longer the camera. It was just a door, and the door was open. I felt something had crossed the threshold, clinging to me, not choosing a way out. The first night at David's house, I didn't have my camera open, but as soon as I opened my eyes, I heard the sound of wood creaking, even though there wasn't a chair in the room. I jumped up, sweating, and looked around the room. David was still sleeping soundly beside me, but in the mirror on the wall, I caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure sitting right next to me. I relaxed, my eyes wide, and then blinked, and the image disappeared. But the fear was still there. I knew it had followed me here. The next day, I decided to go back to the apartment to reflect on the truth. I couldn't run anymore. When I opened the door, the cold scent rushed into my nose, making me terrified. I walked in. Everything was the same as before, but the atmosphere was heavy to the level of design. I put the camera back, this time facing directly behind me instead of the corner of the room. I wanted to see if it would continue with me no matter what. As night fell, I lay motionless, glued to the phone screen. Around 3 a.m., the signal began to falter. And then, I found a mirror right on the bed. It wasn't as blurry as before, so clear that I could see every detail clearly. It was a man's face, deep eyes, a faint, unpleasant smile behind. I jumped up, rushed out of bed, but the bedroom door wouldn't open. I banged my hand hard, screaming, but the door seemed to be locked from the outside. When I turned around, the shadow was straight, right at the edge, advancing towards me. On the screen camera, not just one, but many other glasses appeared, all turned towards me. The room was cold, the temperature dropped unexpectedly. My breath was steaming, my heart was pounding. I retreated to the corner of the wall, running quietly holding the phone, but the live signal disappeared completely. The only thing left on the screen was the red, blurred text. "You belong to us." I fell down, my eyes feeling numb with fear. When I opened my eyes again, the apartment was completely empty. The door was unlocked, everything returned to normal. But I knew clearly, from this moment, I was no longer alone. We were present in my life, creeping into every breath, every sleep. I began to hear footsteps when I was alone. The whisper of wings echoed even during the day. In the mirror, I found shadows of service passing by. In the darkness, I felt someone sitting and staring straight at me. It all became a series of endless shadows, a haunting story reliving right in my small apartment. And then, another night, as I tried to fall asleep, a cold hand suddenly landed on my shoulder from behind. I turned around. The cold hand on my shoulder made my whole body numb. I turned my head quickly, but only after a cold void. No, I was sweating. Armpit odor running down my face, my heart pounding like it was about to jump out of its cage. I turned on all the lights in the room, sat curled up on the bed, trying to convince myself that it was just an illusion. But the obvious truth was undeniable. I had touched that thing. Something invisible but heavy, cold as ice. I couldn't sleep all night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard a soft breathing sound right next to my ear. Sometimes it was the sound of footsteps walking around the bedroom. Sometimes it was the quiet sound of wood in the dark. I was still, not moving, like a person imprisoned in my main room. The scary stories I had heard from others now became reality, more terrifying than any words. The next morning, I decided to leave the apartment. I thought that if I went out to a crowded place, I would be safe. But even as I walked along the apartment corridor, I could still clearly feel an invisible gaze watching me. When I got off the elevator, the screen reflected the darkness behind me. But when I turned around, I thought there was no one. There were only 4 silent and silent walls beside me. I went to a crowded coffee shop, choosing a seat near the window. I hoped the loud noise would help me forget my dream. But when I opened my phone, the camera app popped up without me being harmed. On the screen, the image that appeared was not a brightly lit coffee shop, but my room, the bed, the wooden chair, and the figure sitting motionless in it. I panicked, immediately turned off my phone, but my hands were still shaking. That proved a scary truth. I could leave the apartment, but that shadow would follow me wherever I went. Tonight, I returned to David's house to stay temporarily. I didn't want to face my apartment anymore. When David told me the whole story, he was half believing, but he agreed to let me sleep over. We put the camera in the boys' living room together, pointing it at the sofa. We wanted to see if it would appear here. Night fell. We sat next to each other, eyes closed on the screen. Time passed slowly. 2:45, nothing. 2:50, the room was quiet. But at exactly 2:59, the camera vibrated, the screen clicked. A figure appeared on the sofa, sitting like the shadow I saw in the bedroom. I held my breath, and David's face turned pale. We looked at each other, neither of us saying a word. The shadow sat quietly for a few seconds, then slowly turned its head towards the camera. Its black eyes were empty, its face was pale, and its half-smile was obvious. David jumped up, rushed to turn off the camera, but the screen didn't turn off. The shadow was still sitting there, and it seemed to be getting closer. I screamed, threw the phone on the floor. The screen, the light was strong. The apartment was silent. David looked at me tremblingly, scoring. He no longer doubted. He had witnessed what I had to face for a long time. But the fastest speed had not yet been stopped. When we turned to look at the sofa, a clearly convex corner down could have just sat there. We stayed up all night, not fading our eyes. The next morning, David said, "I think you have to find out where this thing came from. It didn't appear naturally. There must be a story behind it." I nodded, though my heart was full of fear. The next day, I went to the apartment management, asked about the history of my apartment. The manager avoided, but finally revealed. Many years ago, there was a man who died in that apartment. He was found sitting motionless on a wooden chair in the bedroom, his eyes wide open, his mouth in a strange, unnatural smile. A death without cause, without trace, without explanation. After listening, I shuddered. All the pieces began to fit together. That wooden chair, that shadow, all were connected to that mysterious death. I realized that I was living in a story without an end, a living copy of the scary stories that others often told to tease each other. But for me, it was not a joke. It was the truth, an acceleration of my life. And tonight I would have to go back to my apartment to face it again. I did not know what awaited, but I knew that avoidance was no longer an option. I returned to my apartment one afternoon. The rain and wind were falling outside the window. The wind was blowing through the empty hallway. The footsteps echoed coldly. I inserted the key into the lock. The door made a soft sound that was more like noise than deep. There was no heavy culinary equipment inside, like I had just entered a room that had been abandoned for years. I took a deep breath and turned on the electric light, but the yellow light only added to the creepiness. The familiar wooden chair was still in the corner of the room, alone like a silent night watchman. I looked at it, feeling like an invisible gaze from somewhere was watching. I gathered all my courage, approached the chair, and placed my hand on the cold surface. A current of air ran down my spine, making me immediately let go. I knew there was something hidden here, something that did not belong to the human world. Tonight, I placed the camera in front of the safe, determined to record it by clearly proving it. I turned on the live stream but left it on private. I just watched. I sat curled up on the bed, eyes fixed on the screen. The clock was silent every second. Every sound in the hallway startled me. 2:50, the camera was still silent. 2:55, the screen started to shake slightly. Then, exactly at 3 o'clock, the familiar shadow appeared, but this time it was not alone. Behind the chair, I saw a dim door gradually open, although in reality, the wall was still empty. From inside the door, many shadowy figures crawled out, their faces pale, their eyes dark, all facing the camera. I stiffened, a stench poured out of my body. We did not approach immediately, just stood still as if observing. But after a few minutes, some stepped out of the line, came closer. The camera image was blurry, but I clearly saw the deep eyes and the kiss on the eyelids. I was alert. My hand ran to grab the phone. There was only one thought in my mind: turn off the camera. But before I could respond, the shadow turned straight to me, whispering through the phone speaker in a special voice. "You can't run." The phone fell from my hand. My heart felt like it was bursting. I rushed out of all the lights, but the wooden chair was still empty. Everything in the room was relaxed. I delicately ran back to the phone. The live stream had stopped, but the video was still saved. I opened it again and was horrified to realize, in the last seconds, the camera recorded me sleeping on the bed, and next to me was a shadow sitting, bending down to look quickly at my face. I don't remember when I turned off the live stream, nor when I fell asleep, but the video was proven irrefutable. I began to fear the passage of time, because I didn't know how I was being watched in my weakest moments. The next day, I showed the video to David. Her face was reborn, unable to speak, so she answered. David told me to go find an acquaintance of his, a professional paranormal researcher. I nodded, because at this moment, I needed any help. At night, I went to see him. An old man, his eyes were dark, his voice was deep. After listening to the story, he just sighed. The chair is no longer an ordinary object. It is a material, a place of communication between two worlds. When you turn on the camera, you called them out. And now, they will never leave me alone. I asked, is there any way to escape? He looked at me, his eyes deep, and replied, everything has a price. You must have a target, otherwise they will take away more meaning. I left that house in a confused mood. The rain was still falling heavily, the wind was whistling. I knew the dream had not stopped, and deep down, I felt like that shadow was waiting for me to return to the apartment, waiting for me to enter the room, waiting for me to face it again. After meeting the old man, my mind became heavier than ever. I returned to the apartment, feeling as if every step was being watched by hundreds of invisible eyes. Every time I put my hand on the doorknob, I ran up, wondering what I would face when I opened it. But I still went in because I had no other choice. No special tools, light food, heavy as someone living here in the dark. I turned on the camera, placed it on the control table directly on the wooden chair. I wanted to find the truth, wanted to prove that what I experienced was not just a hallucination. But when the screen lit up, I immediately saw goosebumps on the wood. A clearly defined indentation, as if someone had sat down just seconds before I entered. I ran closer, touching the surface with my hand. It was cold, hard, but in the indentation, I felt a cold breath coming from an invisible muscle. I answered immediately, my heart pounding. At this moment, the camera shook slightly, flashing rapidly. And then, the familiar shadow appeared, sitting right there, shrinking. Eyes as dark as deep space. I sat down, naturally. Why me? But my question was only answered by the creaking noise of wood. The shadow leaned, slowly moving straight towards me. I wanted to scream, but my neck was stiff. I backed away, then hit the wall behind me. My whole body trembled. Sweat was pouring from my armpits. I remembered the posts I had read in forums specializing in real horror stories. People told of things that really only appeared through the camera. Ghosts that haunted victims until they were completely exhausted. I never thought I would become a part of those stories, and now I was living it. That night, I did not sleep. I sat motionless, eyes closed on the screen, watching the shadow sitting still on the saddle for hours. It didn't disappear, nor did it come closer. It just silently watched me. But the scariest thing was the moment of resolution at nearly 4 a.m. When I thought everything had calmed down, it suddenly stood up. But instead of coming towards me, it didn't turn its head to look straight at the camera, put its finger to its lips in a silent effect. I felt like it knew I was filming, knew someone else might see this video. The phone vibrated violently, the screen went black. I jumped up, rushed to turn off the camera, then gasped in the brightly lit room. I knew this war had only just begun. The next day, David came to visit me. I told him what happened. He looked at me with a bewildered and scared look. David said, "You need to leave here. It's really necessary." But I shook my head. I understood. No matter where I go, it will follow me. I marked it. Tonight, I tried a different way. I turned the camera toward the window where the darkness outside was. I wanted to know if they were just in the room or if they had been brought into the world outside. 3 a.m., the image was blurry, then a white face pressed against the window frame. Its eyes were unblinking, staring straight inside. I stepped forward, rushed to pull the cover. But when I looked back at the screen, it was right in the room, next to the wood. I sank down, feeling wonderful. What I was experiencing was no longer simply a strange phenomenon. It had transcended the boundaries of imagination, becoming a part of my life. I had become the main character in one of the most terrifying true stories that I had ever imagined would happen. And then, another night, I woke up to the sound of whispering and breathing echoing throughout the room. Voices were unclear, as if coming from a faraway place. I looked around. The apartment was empty. But in the camera screen, the dark princes were surrounding the bed. All the hardships were waiting. I held my breath, lying still, my heart pounding. Then one of us stepped forward, sat on the edge of the bed, bent down close to my face. The environment was powered by the machine, but there was no noise. While I was working, I knew. My room was no longer a hiding place, but an invisible trap that held my soul. Every night, when the clock struck 3 a.m., the shadows appeared. We were no longer just standing far away watching, but getting closer and closer. I felt every step, every cold breath through my skin. I knew clearly I had been dragged into one of the most terrifying haunted stories, where all boundaries between reality and fantasy had completely subsided. That night, when I lay on the bed, the camera flashed. I didn't calmly look straight at the screen, but the sound coming from the speaker made my hair stand on end. First was the noise of the wood creaking, then a scream, and finally an indistinct whisper. I ran to cover my head with the blanket, but I could still hear it right next to my ear. When I mustered up the courage to open my eyes, in the dim light, I saw a shadow sitting right on the edge of the bed. Staring at me, I screamed, jumped from bed, turned on all the lights, but the room was completely empty. I activated it, trying to catch my breath. The phone was still live, and in the screen, the shadow was still there, sitting on the bed. Its cold eyes directed at the camera. I shuddered to realize the light could chase away their presence the next day. I decided to dig deeper into the history of the apartment. I took out the old records from the management and found an old news article in the newspaper. The man who had died in this apartment was named Richard. He lived alone, more often troubled by strange dreams and being followed. Neighbors said that they heard him talking in his room many times, but no one answered. And then one night, he was found dead, sitting on a wooden chair, his face still holding a tight smile. The story chilled me to the bone. I began to believe that I was repeating Richard's fate. The shadow not only appeared, but it was also attached to that chair, to this apartment. I had accidentally opened the door for it to return. Tonight, I tried a great way. I put the chair out in the hallway. I hoped that if I left it, everything would end. But when I returned to the room, the camera still recorded the image of the shadow sitting right in the corner of the wall, even though the chair was gone. My legs were weak. It was proven that it was not the chair, but this apartment that had the echo. I no longer had a bedroom alone, so I called David. We stayed up all night together, staring angrily at the camera screen. At 3 o'clock, the image shook violently. One person appeared, then 2, then 3. We crowded around the room, around and around. Each figure was pale, eyes black, a crooked smile. I saw David's face pale, his mouth raised in prayer. Then all the shadows turned their heads toward the camera. A single whisper came through the speakerphone. "We want you." I threw the phone down, my heart pounding. But even as the screen went black, the whisper echoed in the room, enveloping us. David shouted, "I have to get out of here." But as soon as he opened the door, it softened, locking. The room was steep, as if the walls were collapsing. I ran, trying to turn on the lights, open the windows, but nothing changed. We were trapped inside. The largest shadow broke away from the crowd, slowly approaching the bed. David and I retreated to the corner, with nowhere to hide. Its eyes were empty but cold to the bone. It stretched out its hand, its long, crooked fingers as if touching the void. I stretched out my eyes, hoping everything would go away. But the deep voice echoed again, right next to my ear. "You belong to us." And then, all the flashlights in the service room went off. We were in darkness. When I opened my eyes, I realized. The darkness cleared the apartment after the lights went out. David and I retreated closer to each other, our hearts pounding as if they were about to burst. In the special screen, we heard a gasp, but it was unclear whether it was our own or something else. A cold breath on the back of my neck, making my whole body numb. David shivered and whispered, "Someone is standing right behind me." Before I could respond, a long, lingering laugh rang out. Echoing throughout the room, my phone suddenly lit up, even though I had turned it off. On it, the camera was still active, showing the entire room flooded with darkness. The white-faced fence crowded around us. I saw myself and David sitting in a corner of the wall, but behind us, right above us, there was a tall, hunched figure. The design was full of horror. I screamed, snatched the phone away, but the sound still echoed from the speaker, voices whispering in unison, as if dozens of breaths were whispering at the same time. I remembered what I had read in true horror stories. There was such an excruciating pain that one could not escape until their souls were pulled away. I had never believed those stories were true until now. When I was living them, David ran to the door using all his strength, but the door was still locked. He screamed in despair. I rushed to the window, trying my best, but the glass shook as if held back by an invisible force. The darkness grew thicker and thicker, as if absorbing our every breath. Then the tall figure separated from the crowd, approaching. It was almost ceiling high, its face unclear, just a black patch of clothing, but its eyes were glowing like two pools of burning coal. It moved down, reaching out to touch David's shoulder. As soon as my finger touched him, David screamed. His body jerked and then fell to the floor. I rushed to shake him, but he was unconscious, his breathing weak. I turned back, saw the shadow still standing there, silently watching me. It didn't enter, didn't attack, just looked as if waiting for adjustment. I felt like it was testing me, wanting to see how scared I would be before it was completely relieved. In a frenzy, I turned on the small flashlight on the desk. The weak light reflected on the ceiling, causing the shadow to retreat a little. But immediately, a series of other shadows rushed in, crowding in front of me. I fell down, holding my head, my lips pleading. The whisper rang out again, this time clearer. "We won't stop." I don't know how long it lasted. When I opened my eyes, the light in the room was back on, and everything disappeared. David was still lying motionless on the floor, but luck remained. I helped the boy onto the bed and sat down on the saddle, too tired to be afraid. But when I looked at the cracked phone screen, I saw a line of text appear even though the phone was off. "You cannot escape." I threw it on the ground, but please know that it was not just an illusion. The next morning, David woke up, his face pale, his eyes in turmoil. He said when he was unconscious, he dreamed that he was being pulled into a dark place, where there were thousands of hands of prey. He tried to escape but could not. And when you think you are about to die, a tall figure whispered, "Not you, but it." Then he woke up. David's story left me speechless. That is, all these precious things were in me and only me. I was marked, became the target that we never let go. That night, I decided to record everything again, despite the danger. I set up the camera in the middle of the room to broadcast live for everyone to see. I wanted to prove the existence of these things, to turn my story into living proof among the true horror stories that no one could deny. When the clock struck 3 o'clock, the screen flashed. Viewers began to comment loudly, shouting that they saw many shadows moving around me. I turned around, and at that moment, the camera recorded the tall shadow appearing right behind me. The spam viewer commented, "It's right behind you." I ran, shaking, not answering my head, and then a cold hand landed on me again. When the cold hand landed on my shoulder, I knew I couldn't hide anymore. I turned my head slowly, but behind me was only black space. However, in the phone screen that was broadcasting live, thousands of people watching saw a tall figure standing right behind me. The comments were heroic, full of words. "It's there, right behind you." I felt my corneas freeze, my whole body shaking as if someone was tightening it. I screamed, threw the phone to the ground. The live streaming suddenly stopped, but the whispering sound still echoed around me, overlapping voices, repeating a single sentence. "We found you." I retreated to the corner of the wall, holding my head tightly, asking for some kind of memorable color in my heart. David woke up, saw me running away from Boo. He rushed over, hugged my shoulder, and shouted, "Enough, you can't face me anymore." But I knew, from the moment the camera captured the first image, my fate had gone down a dead end. I was no longer a spectator of horror stories online, but had become the main character in my own horror story. The next morning, I received countless messages from people who had watched the live broadcast. They said that the last image before the video ended was a tall, unpleasant shadow whispering in my ear. Some even sent screenshots where the shadow's face was more clearly visible, its eyes shining brightly like fire. I looked at them, asking them to squirm, because I knew it was no longer an imagination. David advised me to leave this city, but I understood going anywhere would be useless. It had imprinted itself on my soul, had become attached to me like an inseparable shadow. The only question in my mind now was, why me? I decided to go to Richard's family, the man who had died in the apartment. After many days of searching, I contacted his niece. She initially refused to talk, but when I mentioned the wooden chair and the camera, her voice trembled. She said that Richard had always had an image of an invisible entity in his last years. He placed the chair in the corner of the room to talk to it, believing that was the only way to keep it from harming him. But in the end, it still took his life. I heard it and shivered. It had to be reduced. Now it was continuing that cycle with me. The horror stories I once considered a joke now turned into a dark fate. Tonight, I turned on the camera again. But this time, I decided not to hide. I sat straight on the bed, my eyes staring red at the wooden chair. The clock struck 3 o'clock. The screen increased. The shadow appeared, sitting still on the saddle, but its cold eyes seemed to want to pierce through my flesh. I lived deep, gritted my teeth, and asked, "What do you want from me?" For a few seconds of silence, I imagined I wouldn't get an answer. But then the speakerphone emitted a long whisper. "You called me. I'll stay." I ran lightly, but also gradually understood the truth. It was the fact that I turned on the camera, live streaming, constantly searching for evidence that opened the door, invited them in. What was more terrible was that the image on the screen did not coincide with reality. In front of me, the wooden chair was still empty, but in the camera, the shadow slowly got up, approached the bed. I looked left, found nothing, but the cold feeling on my skin told me it was right on the edge. David sat next to me, eyes wide with horror. "He should. I saw it right next to you." I froze, without turning round. In the speakerphone, the whisper rang again. This time, as clear as a living voice. "I will take everything from you." The lights in the waiting room flickered on and off. Shadows moved around on the walls. I ran, trying to pray, but the words came back to me. As I was doing this, I knew I had no control over anything. And then, of course, the camera turned off. The screen went black. In the darkness, I could clearly hear footsteps approaching, each heavy step echoing. I held David tightly, my heart pounding like it was about to burst. As my vision grew darker, I realized. Darkness enveloped the room. Each step seemed to be pounding straight into my head. David and I sat still, not relaxing deeply, our hearts pounding so hard that they wanted to tear apart the cage. It felt like an invisible cold air was closing around our necks, gently. In my frenzy, I briefly opened my eyes and looked towards the camera. The screen lit up quickly, and I found a scene more terrible than what the human mind could bear. In the camera image, not just one shadow, but every morning, hundreds of shadows crowded in the small apartment. We were close together, our faces pale, our eyes sunken, all looking towards me. Some were tilted with a grimace, and others were crawling on the wall like bags. I felt like I was immersed in another world, where the scary short stories that people used to tell to make baby powder came to life right before my eyes. David grabbed my arm and whispered, "I can't take it anymore, we have to get out." But how can we get out when the door is locked? The window is held back by an invisible hand. We are trapped like prey that has been provided. The whisper rang out again, this time clearer, each syllable stuck straight into my ear. "You opened the door, you can't close it." I ran, trying to cover my ears, but the sound still echoed in my head. I stood still, but my screams were drowned in the sudden wave of sound. Of course, the camera zoomed in suddenly, so someone could control it remotely. The screen focused on the face of one of the shadowy figures. It moved the lens, revealing pitch-black eyes and a mouth that was wide enough to be natural. Its mouth was wide open, and I heard the ringing of the stage from the phone speaker. Not its own voice, but a series of soft voices overlapping each other, pained, desperate. David couldn't take it anymore. He rushed to yank the power cord, turning off the camera. The apartment fell silent. Only our urgent screams remained. But the next second, a gentle tapping sound came from the wooden chair. I turned around and saw it gently climbing up as if someone was sitting down. I approached, running with trembling steps. On the face, I had identified a handprint, a medium print of someone pressing down. I ran lightly, backing away, but the chair was stuck, moving slowly towards me, even though no one had touched it. I screamed, David pulled me back, and we both sat down in the corner of the room. The chair stopped right in front of me, still as if waiting. I knew this would not stop. The story had surpassed what I could control. I had turned my life into one of the most terrifying short stories, but unlike the rest of us, I couldn't fold it up or turn it off to escape it. I was living it, every minute and every second. As the morning light crept through the cracks in the door, David and I were exhausted, eyes hooded, bodies aching. But the silence of the day was just a mask. I knew that when the screen fell, it would all begin again. The next day, I was almost exhausted. The base could be reduced, the eye bags, the mind was as hazy as if lost. But I knew I could not stop. I needed to understand what was following me. Otherwise, I would slowly die in fear. I started reading paranormal stories online, hoping to find common ground. Many stories were similar to my own experiences, truly invisible things appearing on camera, objects moving without reason, voices echoing in my head. But most of them ended in tragedy. The narrator either disappeared or died mysteriously. When I read this, my heart was strong. I did not want my end like that either. I decided to try a different way. I bought salt, incense, and some items that people recommend for exorcism. Tonight, David and I sat in the room, placing a circle around the bed, displaying in the four corners. David was half believing, but I was so wonderful that I clung to any hope. 2:58, the room was silent. Surprise, the fire was trembling. The volcano was about to go out. 3 o'clock, camera click, and the current attribute shadow. But this time it was not sitting on the saddle, but standing right outside the salt circle. It looked up, its eyes smiling. I ran up, trying to stay calm. Surprisingly, other shadows appeared behind it, crowded together, rows of pale-faced rainbows. all looking at me admiringly. I blinked, my eyes were blue, and I prayed. The fire flared up, brighter than before. I caught a glimpse of the shadow taking a step back. My heart was filled with hope. But the next second, the fire was out. The apartment was plunged into darkness. And in that darkness, I heard arguing laughter echoing throughout the space. David shouted, telling me not to move. He said he saw a long hand touching the salt ring, each grain of salt flying up from the ground, disappearing as if by someone strong. The protective ring disappeared in a regular pattern. I shivered, knowing that they had found my fragile defense. The camera shook violently again. The screen blurred, then identified an image that made me freeze. It was me, but a different version. My face was pale, my eyes were dark, my mouth was twisted in a grimace. That version sat on a wooden chair, looking straight at me. I felt like I was facing my own cramped soul. I answered loudly, handing the phone to the floor. But the image was still there, even on the desktop. In it, I was still sitting, kissing the smile that grew wider and wider, softly raising my voice to say hello. I ran softly, quietly to the ground, my ears ringing from the overlapping whispers. David hugged me, trying to pull me out of the moment of the photo, but to no avail. When I woke up, it was morning. The candles were out, salt everywhere. The phone was silent, the screen was black. David sat on the edge, his eyes red from not sleeping all night. He looked at me, his voice thick. "I don't think you have much time left." I was silent. "Please, I understand too." I had opened a door that could not be closed, and what was coming was scarier than anything I had ever experienced. Tonight, I would have to face it again. But this time, I had a feeling they would not just look outside. That night, I was no longer myself. I looked in the mirror and saw bloodshot eyes, pale skin like someone who hadn't slept for a month. David still decided to stay with me, but I knew he was also terribly scared. The room became heavier and heavier. The atmosphere was thick, as if neither of us could resist us. I turned the camera back on, this time in recording mode, not live. I wanted to keep the evidence to myself, because I was afraid that what was about to happen would be too much for the viewers to bear. When the hour clock reached 3 a.m., everything started again. The phone screen flickered, then switched to any image at any time. My room took on many forms, like a moving picture, every line dented, doubled, then stretched. The shadow on the wooden frame was no longer just a blurry image. It looked like a character from a horror cartoon on the internet. Oversized eyes, a mouth cut to the ear, a bulging face that no longer had the appearance of a human. I examined it. The shadow got up. Each step made a screeching sound like metal scraping against glass. With each step, the camera image changed, more distorted, like I was watching an economic cartoon built from reality itself. David grabbed my hand. Trembling, "I can't take it anymore. This isn't real." But I know it's very real. It got closer and closer, and then the camera suddenly zoomed in on its face, choosing full screen. The eyes were shining brightly. The mouth whispered, "You are no longer you." The phone vibrated. The image jumped like a gun. I found a hard tissue version of myself appearing at the same time as the shadow. In the screen, I sat on the bed, leaning to one side, black eyes, a smirk. David screamed, snatched the phone from my hand, threw it down. But the sound still echoed around the room, like a movie playing automatically in our heads. The whole room became a dangerous scene. On the walls, black shadows crawled like living animation. The ceiling caved in, stretched out, and then shrunk. I saw David's image doubled, one real version starting to have a panic attack, the other with a pale glass face sitting on a wooden saddle. Smiling at me, I screamed. My eyes were purple, but in the darkness, the image still flooded my head. Because I no longer needed the screen, I myself became part of the horror movie. I ran away, trying to listen to my voice to retain some sense. This is not real. This is not real. But the whisper answered, this is real. You just don't want to believe it. When I opened my eyes, the room returned to normal. The phone was silent. The light returned. But David sat still, eyes open, looking at me. I asked, trembling, what do you see? He replied, his lips trembling, I see you, but not you. I see you sitting on the wooden chair, smiling at me, and the real you is scared. I can't tell the real place anymore. David's words made me feel cold. I realized that not only me, but also the people around me were drawn into this nightmare. The apartment, the chair, the shadow, all of it was no longer just a phenomenon. It had turned into a separate world, ready for us. I knew that tomorrow night, things would go even further, because when the screen had turned into a vivid animated horror story, the last boundary between reality and fantasy had completely subsided. I had never felt so alone in my main apartment. After a night where everything seemed like a horror show, David couldn't take it anymore. He packed up his things and left me with a short sentence. I can't stay here another second. And so I was home alone again in this hellish place. The room here was still normal as before. Every step I took around the room echoed, as if there were other footsteps that could imitate it. I tried to sit on the bed, but clearly felt someone sitting down at the same time, making a cushion next to me. I turned around, but saw only empty space. I was starting to think I was losing my mind. But the camera showed an even more terrifying truth. When I sat alone, the screen showed another figure sitting next to me, standing still and staring straight at me. I ran, shaking, no longer penguin phone. But sometimes I heard it turn on, even though my hand didn't touch it. Every time, the screen would show me sleeping, and right next to me, a shadow sitting motionless, watching me talk intently. That night, I decided not to turn on the camera, just sitting in the dark. But my mistake was that turning off the camera would make them disappear, because I could still hear the noise of the wooden chair sitting in the corner of the room, the whispering of wings in my ears, and the footsteps walking right next to the bed. I closed my eyes, trying to ignore it, but a deep voice suddenly sounded right next to my ear. You are never alone. I woke up, turned on the light. The apartment was bright, no more noise. But I knew I had just heard them, not felt them. And what was more terrible was that I started to see them even without using the camera. The shadowy figure passing through the hallway, the pale face in the bathroom, the bright eyes flashing on the ceiling. I was around even when I was home alone. The next day, I tried to leave the apartment, went to the library to look for more documents. I rummaged through the old archives and found a copy of this apartment complex. It turned out that this place was built on the grounds of an old hospital. Hundreds of patients died alone. Many of them could not remember. Rumors spread that their souls were still around, looking for the presence of the living to cling to. I read and felt cold. Perhaps what I experienced was just a sequel to the tragedy. I left the library with a confused mind, feeling like invisible eyes were watching my every step. When night fell, I returned to the apartment. I tried to lock the door, close it, but in my heart I still knew what was on them. I lay down, pulled the covers over myself, but immediately I clearly felt something heavy lying on the edge of the bed. I held my breath, my heart pounding. In the darkness, a cold hand gently stroked my hair. I jumped up, screamed, turned on the lights, but the room was empty. Only the camera automatically lit up, showing me lying on the bed. And right next to me was a shadow sitting, a smirk spreading across my face. I rushed forward, pulled out the power cord. Threw the camera at the wall. It was complete, effective. I sat down, thinking that everything would end. But when I started up, the reflection on the wall mirror was not just me, but two stylish figures. One was me, and the other was the pale shadow behind me, black eyes. A faint smile. I understood that the camera was only the opening door. Right now, even without any equipment, we were ready to secure the world. And tomorrow night, when I continued to stay here alone, I knew. The rain fell heavily tonight. The sound of rain tapping on the window panes was quiet and rhythmic, emphasizing the sound. Normally, I always found it easy to fall asleep when listening to the sound of rain. But now, each sound became a rhythmic sound in my head. I sat on the bed, the yellow light flickering, casting a cramped shadow on the wall. I wondered if something more terrible would happen tonight. The room was silent, except for the sound of rain outside. I pulled out my covers, trying to avoid the sweaty darkness outside. But then, right in the middle of the steady rain, another sound rang out. A tapping sound, gently blending with the sound of rain. But I knew for sure it was not natural. It was like the slow tapping of fingers on the glass, as if someone was standing outside the window, wanting me to notice their presence. I ran over and pulled it open. Besides, it was just a white curtain of rain, but in a flash, I found a motionless figure in the rain, looking up straight at my room window. Dark eyes, relaxed wet hair falling down to the pale face. I rioted, fell to the floor, my heart pounding. I grabbed the phone, turned on the camera. The screen lit up, and the figure was no longer outside the window. It was present in the room, right next to the wood. Raindrops dripped from its body to the floor, spreading in long streaks. I was complete, not standing out in my eyes. I tried to shout David, but remembered that he had left. I was completely alone. I backed away, my hand shaking as I held the phone. The figure moved slowly, each step sounding quickly deflated by the rain. In the speakerphone, the sound of the rain became deafening, like the whisper of hundreds of voices blending, echoing throughout the room. I fell to the floor, my eyes not leaving the screen. The shadow approached, then stopped right in front of me. It moved down, mouth machine. I strained my ears to listen, and my heart almost stopped when I heard a soft voice. "We're in," immediately after. All the flashlights in the side room went off. The nature of the darkness. I heard a faint dripping sound. I didn't know if it was from its body or from its wet hair. In the darkness, cold breath hit my face. I almost felt it clearly. I ran and prayed, trying to turn on the flashlight on my phone. The weak light shone up, but there was nothing. The room was empty. Only a large puddle of water right next to the wood, like the trace of someone who had just stepped out of the rain and disappeared. I sat down, a wonderful feeling rising. I could no longer distinguish between real and virtual. But one thing was certain. What I experienced was not just a random phenomenon. It was an intrusion into the master, and tonight I knew they would not just knock or look anymore, because when the rain sounds outside, I will hear it in my own ears, whispering close to my ear. After that rainy night, I was almost exhausted. The facility could be separated. My spirit was down, but I still couldn't leave the apartment. I knew clearly, no matter where I went, those things would find me. We were attached to me, like a shadow that couldn't escape. I started to record everything that happened, every single detail. I thought that if I were to turn this experience into a complete story, it might be like the creepypastas that people often share online. But the other place here wasn't fictional. It was the truth I had to live every day, every night. I wrote about the first camera that recorded the shadow sitting on it, about the live broadcasts that were interrupted by whispers, about the tall shadow that appeared behind me, about the water from the invisible body dripping onto the floor. I wrote it all, hoping that one day someone would read it and believe me, even if I no longer existed. That night, while I was writing, my phone rang. A strange text message came in, with only one line. "We like the way you tell stories." I threw the phone away, my blood running cold. Who could have sent this message when I hadn't shared the manuscript with anyone? When I picked up my phone, the screen lit up, displaying a paragraph of text. It was exactly what I had written on my computer a few minutes ago. But at the end of the line was a sentence I had never typed. And then it disappeared forever. I rubbed my body, eyes wide, sweat pouring out like a shower. I turned back to look at the computer. On the screen, the cursor jumped automatically. Each character appeared slowly, as if an invisible hand was typing for me. A new line appeared. "This is not just creepypasta. This is the truth." I turned on the lights all over the room, screaming in despair. But the sound of typing still echoed. The words continued to appear on the screen. In those sentences, I read a description of myself, every action in the apartment right now, to the point where fear was running through my mind. We knew exactly what I was doing, what I was thinking, and now we were writing it all down. I rushed to turn off the computer, but the screen was still on, the words still appearing. And then, on the screen appeared one last line. "Turn around, it's behind you." I froze, not responding. The unpleasant breath on the back of my neck made me know I was no longer alone. I slowly turned around. The darkness was thick, but in it, a pair of dark eyes were staring red. I screamed, slammed the light switch. But when the light flooded, I couldn't think of anything. I fell soundless. I realized we controlled not just the images, but the stories. We were turning me into the main character in a terrifying version of creepypasta, where I could not control my fate. Tonight, I know they won't just write about me anymore. Will make me live out the script we created. And when that happens, I'm afraid I won't be myself anymore. After several silent nights in the apartment, I decided to leave, at least temporarily. I needed to escape this wall, to breathe fresh air, to find some peace. I packed my backpack, brought my umbrella, some essentials, and drove out of the city. I planned to spend a few days camping in the woods, where there were no cameras, no wood, no creepy whispering noises. When I arrived, the woods were covered in fog. The night birds echoed in the distance. I chose a clearing near the lake, built a fire, lit it, and tried to reassure myself that this would be my first night of peaceful sleep in weeks. The fire crackled, the insects chirped, the wind blew through the leaves. All created a seemingly safe and light scene. But even in the middle of the woods, I still couldn't escape the feeling of observation. I heard the rustling of leaves, the light footsteps around the campsite. I turned on the electric light, scanned every dark corner, but there was nothing but long tree shadows on the ground. I turned back to sit at the edge of the fire, my heart still pounding in the middle of the night. As the fire gradually died down, I began to hear a familiar sound. A wooden saddle ringing clearly in the quiet space. I settled down. In the middle of the forest, there was no such thing. I ran to open my backpack and was stunned to find in it the Keek camera, something I was sure I had left in the apartment. The screen lit up, showing the image of a technical safety right at the edge of me. I threw the camera to the ground, but the noise reduction rang right inside. I turned, and in the darkness, the shape of a wooden chair appeared, on which sat a motionless shadow. A smile curved slightly in the night. Dark eyes looked over me lightly. I rushed out of the closed door, running through the forest. Footsteps followed. A whispering noise echoed everywhere, as if the woods were echoing their sounds. I slipped, the flashlight fell, and when I looked up, I saw a line of pale figures around me. We stood in the trees, all eyes turned toward me. I screamed, but the sound faded into the darkness. I ran until I was exhausted, sitting down at the base of a tree. Then I heard the rain start to fall, mixed with the familiar whisper. In the time it took me to sort it out, I understood the ultimate advantage. I could start the apartment, but I couldn't start them. We were everywhere, in the darkness, in the rain, and now in the deep woods where I camped. When I turned around, there was a wooden chair right behind me, and on it, the shadow was already sitting. A crooked smile of long experience. I knew this night would be longer than any before. I thought the deep forest would choose a way out for me, but the more I ran, the more I saw the truth. There was no safe place. As I sat down under the tree, Tuet fell. I felt each cold breath through my collar. I answered my head and saw a row of dark eyes staring recklessly from the shadow of the forest. The whole forest was like a haunted house, where every tree trunk, every water drop contained invisible shadows waiting. I woke up, ran my horse towards the lake. The water's surface was calm, the moon reflected, but when I got closer, I saw an image that was not mine. On the water surface, a flat smile, disheveled hair, a pursed smile appeared. I panicked, rushed back, tripped, and fell to the ground. When I lifted myself up, I saw right on the other side of the lake a row of shadow wolves standing in a straight line, all doing the same thing, tilting their heads to look at me. The whisper echoed across the lake, lasting like a howling wind. I was protected. There was no way out. I ran back, hoping to find some safety in the space that belonged to me. But when I got there, the chi had disappeared. Instead, in the middle of the empty space, there were only familiar wooden chairs. On them, a tall figure sat motionless, eyes shining brightly, mouth twisted into a strange smile. I screamed, retreating, but both forms gradually increased the forest. Trees tilted, rocks shook. I realized I was no longer in the forest, surrounded by 4 dark walls, the same base as my apartment, but worn, stretching endlessly. The wooden chair was still there, and I was imprisoned again. I understood I didn't really leave this place. It was all just a loop of haunting pain, where no matter where I went, I would only return to the starting point. I sat down, gasping for breath. In the darkness, the sound of rain echoed again, but this time not outside, but right in this narrow room. Water flowed in streams, spreading everywhere. The dark figures emerged from the water, crawling out step by step, stretching out their long arms towards me. I tried to struggle, but was surrounded on all sides. I shouted, "Why me?" The response was only a muffled whisper, "Because you called us." I was desperate, holding my head, my whole body trembling. The flashlight fell into the water, its light shining on the pale faces surrounding me. The tall figure stood up, walking closer to me. Its eyes were like two bottomless pits. Its mouth gently opened, and the sound of wind howled throughout the room. This is just the beginning. When I woke up, I was lying on the bed in the familiar apartment. Everything was quiet, as if nothing had ever happened. But in the frame on the wall, I saw the luxurious wooden chair, and on it I was sitting motionless, smiling. I understood that this dream was no longer a dream. It was a haunting reality that I had to live every day, and the next night they would come closer than ever. When I opened my eyes, I found myself back in the familiar apartment, everything bright as if nothing had ever happened. But I knew clearly this was not normal, because on the wall frame, there was not only me reflected, but also a silhouette sitting on a wooden chair. I turned back, quiet, but in the mirror it was still sitting there, motionless, its mouth showing a hideous smile. I almost went crazy. I turned on the computer, wrote everything that had happened from the beginning until now. I wanted to get evidence, so that everyone would know that this was one of the true stories and not fiction. But the more I wrote, the more I realized my hand no longer completely controlled the keyboard. The words that appeared were not only my thoughts, but also the advice of someone else, someone who was intervening in each character. The screen showed an answer. I breathed, "No one will believe you, unless you disappear." I slammed the computer, trying to turn it off, but the screen lit up by itself, showing old videos. All the times I went live, the ghosts, the whispers, all appeared like a terrifying diary. But there was one detail that made me numb. In each video, the tall shadow got closer and closer to me, from far away to right behind me, then so close that I could feel its cold breath. That night, I didn't sleep. I turned on all the lights, huddled in the corner of the room, eyes fixed on the mirror. The shadow in the corner was still sitting there, not moving. But at about 3 a.m., it suddenly turned its head, looking straight at me. I finished, unable to look away. In a second, I found the server environment. I liked to get closer, and clearly heard the whisper coming from inside the column. "We have been here forever." I ran, shivering, turned away, but when I looked back, in the mirror there was no longer just a shadow. The column of pale faces crowded behind it, all looking at me. I climbed up, covered myself with a blanket, but the laughter still echoed in the room. I wanted to run away, but my limbs were stiff, unable to move or speak. I felt as if an invisible hand was tightly gripping my shoulder. Then a knocking sound came from the floor, each beat passionately beating my heart. I squinted my eyes, my whole body trembling. When I opened my eyes, I found myself sitting on the wood again, and my muscles on the column were standing there. My eyes were black, my smile was crooked. I screamed loudly, and I was in the trash, but I couldn't escape. The room spun, the flashing lights flashed, and then all the tasks went off. In the darkness, the familiar, deep voice rang out again. "This is the truth. No one can deny it. This is one of those true stories that will be told forever." I knew I was very close to the final boundary, and when I crossed it, I would no longer be myself. But one question still haunts me: who is really telling this story? me or the people sitting behind me. And the next night, the answer will be clear. I sat motionless on the wooden saddle, my body as if tightly chained by invisible chains. In the mirror in front of me, I saw myself standing, black eyes hugging, a grimace. I shouted loudly, but the sound was perfected in the thick darkness. Then rows of pale-faced reflections appeared behind me, all looking at me with the same hateful eyes. I realized this was no longer a devil's joke. This was one of those revenge stories, where the soul that had died in solitude now returned to demand justice. We didn't just want me, we wanted me to pay for what had happened in this apartment. In the hospital that had been built on this land, the whispers rang out in unison. No longer an invitation, but a sentence. You will replace us. I trembled, my whole body numb. I looked around, saw shadows crawling out from the wall, from the floor, from the ceiling. We approached, eyes blazing with lamentation. I understood that I had been chosen as a body, pulled into the loop of reporting. I tried to shout, I am not involved, I did nothing. But the only answer was a lacquered laugh. You opened the door, you called us, you cannot object. I realized, just out of curiosity, because I wanted to record the creepy footage, I had unintentionally freed them. At that moment, I had to pay the price. The tall shadow stepped forward, the forest of long hands placed on my level. A cold air penetrated straight at this moment. I gently exhaled. I felt my soul gradually leaving the physical body. In the light, I saw my second self, the one with black eyes and a creepy smile, stepping out of the diaphragm, approaching, replacing me. I struggled, begged, but in vain. The cold hands tightened around me, pulling me into the darkness. In my despair, I saw the truth. It was all just a spiral of hatred, an endless story of revenge. Souls who could not find peace. Yen had turned this place into a trap. He dragged each curious step in. I was just the latest victim, and surely the last. The light increased. I opened my eyes, found myself sitting motionless on a wooden chair. In front of me, the camera was still recording. The live broadcast was still playing. Thousands of people were commenting, bewildered to see me sitting stiffly, kissing the crooked smile on my face. But in my evil heart, I knew the person sitting there was no longer me. I was imprisoned, erased, and the second person controlling that body was just a shadow that wanted to continue transmitting words. It would tell this story, turning me into a living testament to the never-ending stories of revenge. And when viewers continued to watch the live broadcast, when they curiously opened their own cameras in the middle of the night, the door would open again.